Welcome back to Everyday Economics, the podcast that helps you learn about the economic world happening around you every day. I'm your host, Chris Krug, CEO of the 501c3 nonprofit, nonpartisan Franklin News Foundation. Everyday Economics is a production of America's Talking Network. You can subscribe to all of our podcasts at americastalking.com. To support Everyday Economics, please make a tax-deductible charitable contribution by clicking the link in the show description. We're recording this episode on Friday, May 17th, and joining me as always, Dr. Orphe Divounguy, PhD economist. Dr. O, one of the measures that you and I try to pay attention to, because I think it gives you really meaningful insights into the real world, which is the place where you and I try to live, is this rent versus wages concept. And rents and wages are both moving targets. Rent, however, seems to be moving with greater pace upward than wages are. So I know Zillow has done quite a bit of analysis on this subject, and I'm not going to bounce past this to you. I'm going to chest pass this to you. Run with this. Talk to me about what's going on with rent and wages, because the gap seems to be widening.
So let me just gonna set the record straight. The first thing is, in 2023, wages have actually outpaced rent growth. So that's the good news, right? I wanted to start with the good news because I usually start interviews with the bad news, but let's just start with the good news. Wage growth is now outpacing rent growth. Wages are growing at about 4.3% per year, 4.1 last jobs report. Rents are growing. You know, it depends. If you get into an apartment, rent growth are about 2.7% year over year. Single family rent growth still a little bit higher at roughly, 4%. So roughly on par with wages. All right. So definitely some easing there, a slight improvement in rent affordability over the past year. But with that said, rents increased so much during the pandemic so fast that wages just hadn't been able to keep
well,
up.
I mean, the stat that's coming up, right, from 2019 to 2023, that rents nationally jumped up 30.4%. And that is an analysis that was done by this company called Zillow that I've heard of.
I know them very well.
And apparently working in collaboration with Street Easy.
I know that company also very well. You know, Street Easy is actually the Zillow for New York City, right?
New York City needs its own Zillow? Okay.
Look, rents jumped 30%, wages jumped 20% during that same time period. And so, of course, rent affordability got strained. But let me give you another crazy
That's
stat.
more than just a pinch there, Doctor.
Oh, man, listen to this stat. In the U.S., the income needed to comfortably afford a rent is now $80,000 for a renter household, compared to roughly $60,000 before the pandemic. Oh my gosh, right? A $20,000 increase. And it varies greatly across the country. In the New York metro area, a renter would need a household income of roughly $103,000 to be comfortable. Renters today spend nearly 40% of their income on rent in New York. That's nearly half of your income going to housing. Oh my goodness.
What should that number be?
30%. I mean, the government says, hey, 30% or lower is affordable. Anything above 30% is what we consider rent burdened. And guess what? Almost half of all renters are rent burdened in the United States. That is crazy.
Yeah. So if you live in New York, you should probably think about maybe moving to Hackensack or I don't know. I don't know what the rents are at Hackensack, but maybe New York's not for you if it's gobbling up that much of your wages.
Let me tell you something. In Minneapolis, rents fell 2.3% and wages increased 2.4%. So like in that same time period, you had places like that where basically your wage increase outpaced the rents, right? And you look at places like, and then the opposite is like Tampa, Florida, Miami, Florida. In Miami, rents increased almost 53% in that time period, while wages only increased 20%.
You and I remember those videos of people talking about their rent going from like $1,800 a month to $2,400 a month on the renewal of the lease, and they're like, how am I supposed to do that? I don't have that. You've pushed me beyond my limit. And then they were either forced to move or change their living circumstances.
Yeah. And you know what? And ultimately, why is that? The least affordable metros in the country today are Miami, New York, Los Angeles, Riverside, California, San Diego. You notice we said Los Angeles, California, Riverside, California, San Diego, California, right? The most affordable metros are Salt Lake City, Minneapolis, St. Louis, Austin, Texas, Raleigh, North Carolina, basically places that build, right? What do the least affordable region have in common? They simply don't build enough housing.
Well, they're also older cities, right? I mean,
they're older. You know why they're older, right? You know why they're really old, right? Because they don't build. Like the housing stock is so damn old. They don't build. There's no refresh. There's no inventory. You have.
Well, where are you going to build in New York City if you're not knocking something down?
Let me tell you, I'm talking about the New York Metro.
Okay, fair enough.
Right? You go to Long Island, they don't build the inventory. Like you're lucky if you find a house that's like less than 20 years old. You're lucky. You're absolutely lucky, right? And so like these places just don't build. Yeah, and yeah, fair enough. They're on the coast. They got like the ocean to one side. I get it. They got some mountains and lakes that prevent building. I get it. But they're the most restrictive when it comes to building regulations across the country. Too restrictive, right? They just don't build. And they don't build because of that, because of these restrictions. And of course, when you don't build, what happens? Well, what happens is supply lags demand. And when supply lags demand, prices increase. You also know, and I was talking to a reporter yesterday about this, that most migrants coming from abroad move to the coastal markets first. When they come to the U.S., they tend to go to the coastal markets. And so that pushes up demand for housing, right? And the addition in net families, the new families coming in, pushes up pressure on the demand side. And so unless you deregulate, allow builders to build, right? Those markets are always going to remain very expensive. That's just a fact. You know, relative to the Midwest, let's say, that doesn't necessarily get that big surge of migrants coming in every year. Also, research shows that migrants tend to go where previous migrants from their countries have gone, right? So like, you know, if people from my country tend to move to New York, you know, I'm going to go to New York first. You know, I'm going to settle there. And of course, that puts pressure on rents in the region. Anyway, look, with roughly half of renters experiencing housing insecurity, I know another great organization that is committed to ending homelessness before it starts. I think that's pretty cool. It's an organization called Housing Connector. They've partnered up with over 1,800 properties across the country to provide stable housing for more than 6,200 renter families. I think that's tremendous, right? A lot of people always wait for the government to step in. There's a lot of nonprofits out there and private sector groups that are doing the good Lord's job at keeping people housed by simply working with landlords and property managers across the country to keep people housed instead of letting them end up on the streets. I think that's wonderful.
Well, you should be proud of your affiliation there. I think that is it's proactive. It's absolutely proactive. Final thoughts, Dr. O.
Look, build. We need to build. You know, in the New York metro area, rents increased 8.6%, while wages grew just 1.2% in 2023. Just think about it. We just said wages grew 4.2%, 4.3%. Rent growth slowed, grew less. And in New York, we had the opposite. Rents increased 8.6%, while wages only grew 1.2%. in 2023. That is scary, right? Boston, rents increased 5.8%. Wages only increased. Wages fell 1% in Boston. So, you know, you want to talk about affordability again, local governments work on those regulations, on zoning rules, land use rules, you know, work with builders to allow for more building, allow them to build taller, to build smaller, to get rid of those minimum parking requirements, Get rid of those. By the way, housing is going to be a big issue for the election. And we got two candidates with different ideas about how to fix the affordability crisis. We should do a podcast episode on that.
Yeah, next time we get together, we will. All right, Dr. Earl, great to spend time with you. For Orphe Divounguy, this has been Chris Krug. Subscribe to Everyday Economics and dozens of high-quality podcasts at americastalking.com.
Freedom, individualism, limited government. On these issues, conservatives and libertarians generally agree. But where do we disagree? Check out the Future of Freedom podcast for civil, reasoned conversations about some of today's most pressing topics. It's not a debate. Our goal is to provide the best arguments from either side of an issue. Then you decide. It's the Future of Freedom podcast. Find it at americastalking.com or wherever you find your podcasts.